So today I want to show you some benchmarking results once again. Today's test subjects are Bazzite and SteamOS. I wanted to see if there is any significant difference between these two, especially running them on the Steam Deck, which is kind of the showcase device for SteamOS, I guess. Let's just start with what we're actually comparing first. For Bazzite, we are of course on Bazzite 43, running kernel 6.17.7 and in desktop mode GNOME version 49.2 in a Wayland session, of course, since this is the default. For SteamOS, we are using our results from last time again, which means it is SteamOS 3.7.20, running kernel 6.11.11 and KDE Plasma version 6.2.5, but in an X11 session. Enough talking, let's just start with the benchmarking results as usual. Our first game again, Cyberpunk 2077, of course. We can see actually SteamOS slightly outperforming Bazzite, which is, at least I think, a little bit surprising, considering SteamOS is quite a bit behind on kernel version, and we saw in a past comparison that I think it was a jump from kernel 6.17 to 6.18 actually made quite a big difference. Big is relative, I guess. A noticeable or measurable difference is what I mean by it. But back to Cyberpunk, we can see a 3%, roughly 3% lead for SteamOS. And I forgot to mention, these tests are of course all done in the gaming mode, since this isn't a desktop environment comparison. The same story continues for our next usual subject, which is once again Red Dead Redemption 2, running as usual on 720p lowest settings. In this case we have 47.8 FPS for SteamOS and 45.4 FPS for Bazzite, which means again a roughly 5% lead for SteamOS. And this story, interestingly, not only continues, but SteamOS's lead gets bigger and bigger with GTA 5 enhanced, 720p minimum settings as usual. We have 80.4 FPS for SteamOS and 72.1 FPS for Bazzite. I thought this one is particularly interesting, but we also saw in the past GTA 5 seems to be a little more sensitive than other games. For example, we saw in the desktop environment comparison Gamescope massively outperforming GNOME and Plasma, while Cosmic was quite far behind, which wasn't really observable in any other game of that video. This is our biggest difference between SteamOS and Bazzite so far, which means we have roughly an 11% increase in performance for SteamOS compared to Bazzite. I initially thought I forgot to pick a certain Proton version for Bazzite, but after rerunning it multiple times, I never got close to the average of 80 FPS for SteamOS. So I guess there is just something configured differently in SteamOS. And now that we have the same three games checked off as in the last benchmark, I wanted to add something new. This time we have Counter-Strike 2, also 720p low settings to achieve higher FPS. I especially wanted to add some Linux native games as well, not just games through Proton. That's also why I wanted to add CS2 in the mix. But same story as before continues. Again, 140.7 FPS for SteamOS and 127.7 FPS for Bazzite, which means again roughly a 10% lead for SteamOS, which means roughly the same picture as with GTA 5 enhanced just before. And now for our last test, I wanted to do something completely different. We have BeamNG.Drive again, which I actually tested this time. Last time you only saw the background footage of it, but no actual testing was done. And not only is it a Linux native game again, which I thought is interesting, but also I wanted to compare the desktop mode. Of course, this is not the best comparison, since using the Plasma version of Bazzite would have been better for this. That's also why I'm only including this as a bonus round, so to say. But this is the first time we actually see Bazzite outperforming SteamOS, of course only by a very small margin, but still nonetheless a roughly 2% lead for Bazzite over SteamOS, which is quite interesting considering SteamOS was at times significantly outperforming Bazzite in gaming mode. and also because we were running an X11 session in SteamOS, which we also found to be very slightly better regarding performance than the Wayland session. However, SteamOS is still significantly behind with their Plasma version, so I guess just running a much newer GNOME version already did enough for us to achieve this lead over SteamOS. Still, I think it's very interesting that SteamOS, despite shipping older packages and an older kernel, is able to outperform Bazzite at all. That's why I also looked at the RAM usage, which is of course a strength of Linux-based systems in general over Windows machines. And actually there was quite a significant difference. Just continuing with BeamNG.Drive, I saw 11.6 gigabytes of peak RAM usage for Bazzite and only 10.3 for SteamOS. Of course, that's also why I said the desktop mode comparison is not ideal. GNOME might contribute to higher RAM usage as well, which is why this comparison is not ideal. But also comparing Cyberpunk from earlier in gaming mode, we still see a significant difference. We have 6.6 gigabytes for Bazzite and only 5.9 gigabytes for SteamOS, with Cyberpunk 2077 sitting in the main menu. I guess Valve might have done some special tweaks to their kernel or other packages to make it perform this well on the Steam Deck. And of course Bazzite has other strengths such as much broader hardware compatibility and a much more up-to-date desktop mode. So I still really like using Bazzite on my Steam Deck, especially because there are additional drivers included, like for example the T150 driver for Thrustmaster steering wheels or other things in that regard, which just makes it a little bit easier to plug random stuff in and have it working immediately. So as usual, it's great to have different options to suit different people. I, for example, enjoy using GNOME. I know might be a controversial opinion, but I really like using GNOME, so I think it's great to have Bazzite available to fill that niche, even though we saw it did slightly underperform compared to SteamOS today. So that concludes our testing for today. Maybe you could let me know what you prefer or why you prefer it, and if you have come across similar results. Maybe all these different measurements were just an error on my end, but I tried to be as fair as possible in both scenarios. Nonetheless, I hope you could learn something and maybe enjoy this video. If so, I hope to see you next time.